Now, this part of the atmosphere topic, right, is all to do with the carbon footprint, okay? It's one of those kind of trendy things that's in the news quite a lot, right? And what we need to do is we need to know what carbon footprint is, right, and we need to know how to reduce the carbon footprint. Okay, it's all to do with the production of carbon dioxide and methane, but particularly carbon dioxide. Right, so learning outcomes is we've got to describe what the carbon footprint is, describe how carbon dioxide and methane emissions can be reduced, right, because we need to do that to prevent global warming and to prevent the greenhouse effect. And we need to explain why these actions to reduce emissions may be limited, okay, so why it's actually difficult to do some of these things. Firstly, what we're going to do is we're going to just watch a little YouTube video.
The Simple Show explains the carbon footprint. This is you. You've probably been hearing a lot about climate change and how you should reduce your carbon footprint. But what is that exactly? Just like an actual footprint, it's a mark you leave upon the environment. No, not with your shoes, but with every action that releases carbons. Those are the harmful gases, such as CO2, which are pumped out by burning fossil fuels like oil and gas. The more fuel you use, the bigger your footprint will be. You may think that by driving your car, the only carbons you release come from the engine, but no. Consider the carbons that are emitted just to get fuel into the tank, from the energy needed to extract the oil from underground, the pollution caused by transportation and refinement, to the final delivery to your local petrol station. Not to mention the CO2.
So what this is now talking about is quite often people think the carbon footprint of a car is literally the carbon dioxide that comes out the back of the exhaust pipe. But it isn't, right? What the carbon footprint of that car or the fuel for that car is all these other processes. It takes energy and carbon needs to be given out to get it out of the ground, to transport it, that's got an engine, right, to refine it, to then transport it in a big lorry to the actual local garage, and then it goes in, and then you produce more carbon dioxide. So it's the whole process rather than one individual area.
CO2 released by manufacturing your car in the first place, more than you thought, huh? So unless you live in a cave, you and everything you own has its own carbon footprint. Read a book, printing and distributing, it uses energy.
So every single little thing that you've got, so even a book, you wouldn't have thought that a book sat in front of you would have much of a carbon footprint, right? But it's then a tree that's then got to be cut down. That tree is then got to be transported somewhere, right, via a lorry, which then gives out carbon dioxide. It's then got to be processed. It then goes into another lorry, right, to then get delivered to wherever you actually are. Right, so there's huge amounts of different parts to the carbon footprint.
Brush your teeth, and your utensils will have a history in a factory. Even something as basic as an apple could have traveled hundreds or even thousands of polluted miles to end up in your local supermarket. You see, it's pretty much impossible to leave no carbon footprint behind, but that's no reason to stop trying. Think about your actions and choices, and you'll be able to reduce your personal mark after all. That's how you really put the boot into climate change.
Okay, so what we've got there is that's talking about the carbon footprint, and every single item has a certain amount of carbon it's made. This little remote here, right, it's not giving any carbon at the moment, but it has to be made. It has to be made out of plastics. It's got battery in it. It's the amount of carbon dioxide that is required for an object. So the carbon footprint is the total amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases emitted over the full life cycle of the product, service, or event. So it is the full life cycle from when it came out of the ground or wherever it came from to when it actually delivers and does its job. Okay, the carbon footprint can be reduced by reducing emissions of carbon dioxide and methane. So, for example, me coming to work, right? At the moment, I drive, it takes me about half an hour to drive, right, with petrol. If I was then to cycle, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce my carbon footprint because there's not the same amount of carbon dioxide coming out of the back of the car, right? So there's all sorts of different ways in which you can reduce it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through two different tasks that I want you to do. The first one is a describe task, right, which is all to do with giving me some facts, right? I want you to describe how carbon dioxide and methane emissions can be reduced. So go on the internet, right, and research how can a carbon footprint be reduced, right? Maybe come up with about 4 or 5 different ways in which we could reduce it, right? So thinking about things like fossil fuels, power stations, right? Think about what you could actually do. What could you physically do to reduce the carbon footprint, right, of something that you do? So that's the first activity. The second activity then is I want you to do an explain, right, which then has a why next to it. Why, explain why these actions to reduce carbon emissions may be limited, right? Why might the way you have suggested to reduce the carbon footprint might be limited? So think about your carbon footprint, right? Think about the country's carbon footprint. Think about the world's carbon footprint, okay? Why is it that if you've got your Xbox at home, all right, and you could reduce the carbon footprint by turning off that Xbox, why will you not do it? The answer to that is reasonably obvious. Okay, so what I then want you to do is I want you to explain why it is difficult to actually reduce your carbon footprint.